Hello and welcome to Women of Nottingham, the Majority podcast. I'm Catherine and I'm your host. And this week I speak to a really interesting woman named Lottie. She's from Nottingham but is actually currently in Yemen and she's peace building out there. I speak to her about what it's like to be a woman living in Yemen at the moment and what we can learn from the conflict back here in Nottingham.
So, my name's Lottie. I'm from Nottingham, born and raised, but I'm currently working in Yemen for a peacebuilding organisation called Search for Common Ground. So basically, I like to have a big gossip and talk to lots of people, so I really love my job.
So how long ago did you move to Yemen then?
So I initially came out to Yemen in March of this year, 2020, and then about 2 weeks in, COVID hit. I went back to the UK, spent 8 months in the UK, and now I've been back for another 2 weeks, so I've done my quarantine. So yeah, it's really quite new to me, quite fresh to me, although that whole time this year I have been working on Yemen, but just from my home in Nottingham.
I imagine it's been quite the adjustment for you then, being in Nottingham in lockdown, doing online work, to then suddenly being in Yemen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing working from home, and I know lots of people have struggled working from home, me included. But I think when you're, working in a different time zone, you're on a different week schedule, because in Yemen we work Sunday to Thursday. You're so far removed from your colleagues. And also in Yemen, the internet connection's not great, so that remote work has another layer of difficulty.
So for those who might not fully understand, and myself included in that, could you explain a little bit about what peace building is?
Yeah, of course. Peace building is a very broad term, and it's funny because I remember when I was at school, we had designated peacemakers, and it's actually not that different to what peace building is on the international level either. In peace building, we're looking to resolve conflict in non-violent ways, and that doesn't mean that conflict is bad. In fact, it's quite the opposite, and it's an ethos of the organisation that I work for that I really love, that we don't shy away from conflict. We don't think conflict is bad. We think conflict is good. Conflict is, it's because we are part of such a diverse and interesting population in this world. And conflict is inevitable, actually. But the way in which we deal with conflict, that's the bit that we're interested in. So yeah, that can be really at the very local level between school kids in the playground about how they resolve their conflict over, I don't know, who stole the snack. It can also be at the community mediation level. So even in the UK, there's mediators who work on marital disputes, who work on neighbourly disputes, those kind of things. It goes to the national level, and then it also goes to the international level when we're looking at international conflicts. Of course, there are differences. There's a lot more politics involved when you get to the international level. But essentially, it's working for the same goal, and it's using similar techniques, using similar approaches. And that's what, as an organisation, we're trying to do in Yemen.
And how does a Nottingham schoolgirl go on to become an international peace builder? How do you go from one to the other?
That's a good question. I've always been very interested in how I can make the world, no, it sounds very cheesy, but what difference I can make in the world. I guess everybody does, on whatever level they can. But from an early age, I really trace it back to my dad. He was a member of Amnesty International, and we used to write postcards to prisoners of conscience. So Amnesty would often do a campaign at Christmas, or actually throughout the year, I think, when they were working on the human rights of somebody who'd been wrongly imprisoned, or maybe imprisoned but they weren't being given their proper rights, and you could write them postcards. Me and my sister would sit and draw them and colour them and write these postcards, and we loved it. But it taught us a lot about, the different struggles that people go through, and also the importance of human rights. Even though somebody's in prison, even though they might have broken the law, they still deserve basic human rights. And I think it was then that I really realised how lucky I was, being in a very peaceful neighbourhood, in a very peaceful we've had our disputes in Nottingham, we've had our fair share of violence as well. But on the whole, there's law and order and you're protected and feel safe. And I realised at a young age that not everybody has that privilege. And that really unsettled me. And so, I chose to study politics at uni. I studied politics, philosophy and economics. And there I really got interested in the Middle East. There's a lot of conflict going on in the Middle East, unfortunately. But also I really loved falafels and ended up going to Lebanon and doing an internship in Lebanon. And then I decided for my master's I wanted to hone in a little bit on security. I felt that human security and feeling secure in yourself and in your country and in your neighborhood was, for me, like something that was very important. So I found a course actually in France, in Paris. So I went to do my master's in Paris, learned a bit more about, international peace building and, living in a capital city in Europe. There was a lot going on. I met a lot of interesting people. And that's when I learned about Search for Common Ground and decided I want to work there.
And I think there's quite a lot of confusion, particularly in the UK, probably in the Western world more generally, about what is going on in Yemen, because we hear it on the news occasionally, and that's all we ever hear. And I imagine most of us don't really delve any deeper. So could you give us a bit of an insight to what is happening in Yemen and why it's so sorely needed for people like yourself to help?
The interesting thing with Yemen is there's such a focus on the humanitarian side of things, which is absolutely vital and essential. But at the same time, it's a war, which isn't always the case, right? Sometimes you have humanitarian disasters like tsunamis or hurricanes or whatever. And in those moments, the international community really focuses on, okay, how are we going to make sure people have food on their plates, that they have somewhere to live, that, it's basic survival. But in Yemen, there's all those issues, and that applies for 85% of the population are in acute need of humanitarian aid. So that means they don't have what they need to live, to survive, basic survival. But at the same time, there are still airstrikes, there are still bombs going off, there are still parties that are in violent conflict with one another. And really what these people need is peace. They need a break. Many Yemenis are not involved in the conflict. It's between Saudi Arabia and different regional actors, but they are bearing the brunt of this war, and they've lost family members, they've lost friends, and they don't have what they need to survive.
So having now lived in the Middle East, in areas of conflict like you are now, has your perception of those involved changed?
Yes, in so many ways that I won't be able to explain. I think one of the most important takeaways that I've learned is that there are such strong traditions of mediation, and I think some people, they might see the news on Yemen, and Yemen's been in conflict now for over 5 years, and people will see the news and think, wow, these must be like very violent people, but they're not. I mean, sure, some people in Yemen are violent just as much as some people in the UK are violent, but they have very strong traditions of mediation that we learn from. And that's something that's very important to our work as well, is that we're not kind of shipping in this kind of our own ideas of what peace and mediation should be, because we're not the experts on it, they are. We're just there to facilitate and to help.
I'd be really interested to know about what you think of the idea of white saviours and this white saviour complex idea. And I'm certainly not saying you are one of those, but how do you walk the line of trying to help but not be patronising? How can you avoid that in your work?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and I'm glad you asked it, and you can definitely call me a white saviour if you want, that's fine. No, it's heavy on my mind. So personally, it wasn't something that was on my mind when I got into this sector. I thought the fact that I had good intentions was enough, but it's not. It's not at all. Luckily, I do work for an organisation that very much values the voices of the people in countries. We have over 60 staff, and only 2 of us are not Yemeni. everyone else is Yemeni. So we very much hire locally, and that's very much our strategy, to make sure that our work is sustainable, to make sure that our work is rooted in local voices and it's not kind of importing colonial ideas. At the same time, I still need to be careful. For me, it's difficult because it is systemic. So, for example, the way that we fund our projects is from foreign governments. So, for example, the UK government, the Canadian government, the US government, the EU, the UN. We have funding from all these different donors. And in order to fulfill the donor requirements, oftentimes you need a native English speaker to provide reports that are of high quality, with no mistakes in them. You might need native English speakers to deliver presentations that, meet the requirements of the donors, and we're answerable to those donors. So it's hard to imagine right now the system that we have being able to, extract all the white people because at the moment they have a role that the donors require, and if we're not fulfilling the donors' needs, then we're not getting any money. At the same time, when you speak to the local people, for example, my colleagues here in Yemen, a lot of them don't have a problem with non-Yemenis coming here to work, and they actually appreciate the help. I think the bigger issue is when there's inequality. So when, people like me get paid more than the Yemeni staff, or they get better treatment, or they get promoted more easily, or whatever those benefits might be, that's something that certainly needs to be fixed. And I think many organisations can certainly do better in terms of diversifying their board of directors, diversifying their leadership, ensuring that the national staff that they hired are not just drivers and cleaners, but also they are strategic roles, they are leadership roles, they are management roles. So ensuring that, those positions are not just held by people from the West. And ensuring that if they do employ people that are not from the country that they're working in, that they have very good reason to, that they're not, unqualified or underqualified.
I'd be really curious to know, how have you found being a woman living in Yemen at the moment? A lot of what we hear about Yemen is very negative in terms of women and in terms of freedom for women. Yemen ranks very low internationally on ratings for being a woman living in that country. So how have you found being a woman living there?
Certainly, the precautions are very high. So, for example, we live in a guest house, so it's like a shared student house, basically, with my other colleague that's not from Yemen. When I leave, I'm taken by a driver. I don't walk anywhere. I have to wear the abaya and the hijab and sunglasses if I can, to hide the fact that my eyes are blue, because that is a security risk sometimes. So all these precautions are taken, so it's not necessarily known that I'm not Yemeni when I'm outside of the house. And I'm also not allowed to go many places. And if I do, I have to get security clearance. I have to be accompanied. So it's only kind of designated safe areas that I'm allowed to go to. Interestingly, I really enjoy wearing the abaya and the hijab. It's very nice to wake up in the morning and not worry about what you're going to wear, not worry about what your hair looks like. But also, the women in the office have told me, when you get to the office, you can take it off. I leave it on. That's a personal choice because I prefer not to look different. I prefer to, not to stand out. And that doesn't bother me. And it's interesting talking to different women on their view of the abaya and the hijab. So, for example, one of my colleagues told me it's actually an honor to wear the abaya, which is, for those who don't know, it's kind of like a long, it doesn't have to be black, but in Yemen I wear the black kind of a long floor-length coat, I would say, but it doesn't have to be thick. Just basically, you're dressed all in one item of clothing, and it's baggy, so your body shape is not seen either. And she says it's an honor to wear the abaya because women wear the abaya because they're so special, they're so beautiful, they need to be protected, and therefore it's an honor to wear it. And the same with the hijab. So there's definitely I've learned some different perspectives being here from, the tropes that you sometimes hear that women are forced to wear it. And some women are, and that's, that's something that needs to change. But there are many women that willingly wear the abaya and the hijab.
Yeah, certainly, because I can imagine it's quite the adjustment going from living in Nottingham, having relatively complete freedom, going out whenever you wanted, to now being in Yemen where you don't have as much freedom at all.
Yeah, I don't think I've not found it stressful yet. I do worry about boredom, particularly at the weekends. I think what happens to a lot of people in these kind of jobs, if they do these missions abroad, is that they just end up working all the time because they don't really have anything to do. I think the hardest bit for me is like not having my friends here, because even in the UK in lockdown, I could see my friends and talk to people and vent to them and rant to them and whatever other therapy I needed with my friends. Whereas here I can of course talk to them, which is great, but it's very different.
And have you found that that's been stressful for you, that you've had to have, say, escorts wherever you go, and that you've had this sort of complete shrinking of your life?
Yeah. yeah, exactly. The other weird thing is like the person that I live with here is my boss. So, that adds another dynamic. Luckily we get on very well and it's fine. But I'm having to change the way in which I manage my stress and how I'm feeling, because I think particularly over lockdown, actually, I started to really rely on walking, going to the park, or over the summer, I visited Hoveringham Lake a lot and went swimming, and I loved it. So not being able to do those things like connecting with nature, connecting with friends, those things are a real struggle. But I think I wasn't just kind of airdropped here. I knew what was happening. I signed myself up for it. So for now, I'm managing, but I'm sure I'll have some bad days to come, and I'll have to cross that bridge.
And how long are you due to be out there?
So we have cycles of 3 months. So every 3 months we get flown to our home countries, which is very nice. I've just applied for mine early so that I can come home for Christmas, waiting on approval now. So we'll see. But otherwise it's every 3 months that I can come home.
What would you say the biggest misconception that you've heard about people in Yemen or the conflict itself?
People can't really fathom how people are still living here, to be honest, that it's an active war zone. But Yemen's a big country. Yemen's got 30 million people now inside the country. And actually, Yemen receives refugees from other countries as well, which is always interesting. So people have to continue living their lives here. They've got family here. They've got very strong sense of pride in where they come from. Not even just the fact that they're Yemeni, but from the area in Yemen that they come from is very. It's something to be very proud of. And leaving is not an option for many people, for financial reasons, but also because there's not easy borders to cross. They border with Oman and Saudi Arabia, and then there's a sea. So that's why, a lot of them are still inside of Yemen, and they need to adjust, and they're trying to adapt to this conflict and trying to survive.
I'd be really interested to know what the gender gap is in your organisation and how you think that fares with peacebuilding organisations more generally.
Ooh, that's a good question. So our office in Yemen, we have about 50-50, but we have a senior leadership team of 4 people. There's no women in our senior leadership team. But we do have, I'd say 50-50 in our managers, which is good. And we have some very strong, very feisty women in our team, which is fantastic. With the kind of national versus non-national staff is that sometimes a lot of the time they might be reaching 50-50, but it's whether those women or those national staff are in leadership positions, it's how meaningful is that participation or that level of inclusion. And I think that's something that we need to improve on. As I said, our senior management teams hasn't got women in. And I think it's certainly something that as a sector we need to work on as well. Of course, there are challenges in Yemen in terms of, it's more difficult for women to travel. Oftentimes a woman will have to have what they call a mahram, which is like a male member of their family to accompany them when they travel, which can mean, if you're a senior member in a peacebuilding organisation, our management team will travel abroad. They will travel within the country to remote areas that might take 10 hours to drive to. That might not always be possible as a woman if your husband's not available to come with you because he has a job, or your brother can't come with you because he's busy, or these kind of things. So there are so many more obstacles in the way for women beyond the normative ones. There are actual logistical ones as well. And when I say normative, I mean beyond people thinking that women might not be good enough for the job. There are so many initiatives in Yemen just showing you how incredible the women are and how resilient the women are. There's one organisation called Peace Track Initiative, and they're leading like a feminist approach to the peace process in Yemen. And they have fantastic women who speak at the UN Security Council, who participate in peace negotiations, who are from Yemen but based in different parts of the world. And they're really, paving the way for other Yemeni women to gain those positions of leadership and actually be listened to. The big obstacle, of course, is that in the conflicting parties who are negotiating, the peace deal, because they're the ones fighting, a couple of those parties are refused to have women in their negotiation teams, which means that the people negotiating the peace deal are men, and there's not a lot we can do about it. And that's, the big thing that peacebuilding organisations are really trying to work on, because we can do our best at the community levels, and we can promote women's voices, and we can prove how strong women are as peacemakers, but we can't really force the parties to include women in their teams.
So you've spoken about being a woman in Yemen, and I'd be really interested to know when you spoke earlier about Yemeni feminists. And I think there's this idea that people kind of think feminism is just a Western thing, and that's really damaging, right? So could you say a little bit more about sort of the female movement in Yemen?
Yeah, you're definitely right in that people might be surprised to hear that there are, feminist organisations in Yemen, and Yemeni feminists and men as well who are feminists, not just women. And I guess it's a lot to do with the way in which we're taught what feminism means. And like I was saying with the hijab before, I think I've spoken to people before who've said, a woman in a hijab can't be a feminist because she's, she doesn't believe in her freedoms or whatever. But actually, these women are exactly the kind of women that we need in our leadership, because they are the women who are saying, I'm choosing to wear this or to do this, and on account of that, they are a feminist. But of course, it goes way beyond what you wear. And what we're seeing from these women is they are proving that they are very strong at mediation. And, I don't want to say, women are more peaceful and therefore we need more women in the peace process. I wouldn't say that, because I don't believe it's true. Women deserve to be in the peace process because we are 50% of the population, and you can't have a truly inclusive peace deal or one that will last if it doesn't account for 50% of the population.
Definitely. What do you think you've learned living somewhere like Yemen that we could learn from in Nottingham?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, first of all, there are things that we can do in Nottingham to support people like Yemenis abroad who want peace. And we can do that by writing to our elected representatives, our members of parliament. We can ask our MPs on their opinion on certain things. We can ask our MPs to advocate for certain things. We can ask them to vote a certain way on a bill that's coming up. That takes a little bit more research, but if you follow the right Twitter accounts, you'll be all right. I started doing it when I was at uni, and I was like, wow, I didn't know I could write to these people, and they would write back. But they are paid to represent us, so if you do feel strongly about anything, and if, conflict in other countries is one of those things, then you can write to them and say, what's the UK doing about this? Why is the UK supplying bombs to this country? So that's the first thing on kind of, I guess, how you can get involved in international diplomacy from your home in Nottingham, and how that is very key, actually, to how the UK as a country, the direction, that it will take on these conflicts and these issues abroad. The other thing, of course, is that you can support local refugee centres, local charities, through donating clothes, donating money, time, volunteering. And then in terms of what we can learn, I think personally what I've learned most from working with these amazing peace builders in Yemen is exactly, how I started this talk with you, is that we don't need to shy away from conflict, but we need to build the way in which we respond to conflict so that it's not violent. And by violent, I don't just mean like hitting people, but also adversarial words, not very nice language. And this can be applied to any situation, colleague or your mum and dad, or I don't know, you've had a fallout with your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever it is. It's something that I really try to channel in my personal communication as well, is reminding myself, okay, we have a difference of opinion, this is a conflict, and that's fine, and I'm going to explain to you why I think the way that I do, and I'm going to listen to what you have to say, and I'm going to try and empathise with you. I'm going to put myself in your shoes, I'm going to wear your identity, I'm going to try and understand you so that we can come to a solution and find some common ground. Of course, this isn't a special Yemeni practice, but for me, sitting with Yemenis and seeing their mediation practices, it's something that I have been inspired by, and something that I really hope I can continue to channel, after I leave Yemen and when I return to Nottingham one day.
And is that the plan? Would you like to settle back in Nottingham one day?
I think so. I think I would like to. I certainly want to be back in the UK. It's mostly my friends. I think I've lived in a couple different countries now, and I've learned that you can't replace those friendships that you've had for 15, 20 years. They take another 15, 20 years to build, But also for me, Nottingham is just, it's a perfect equilibrium of city and rural, of like modern and traditional. It's just very balanced city, in my opinion. We've got a great music and art scene. We've got great city centre with so much to see and so much to do, but at the same time, like, countryside and lakes and walks on our doorstep. So that's why I love Nottingham.
Not to make you homesick or anything.
Not at all. Just wiping away the tears.
And to finish up, something I ask all of my guests is, what do you think the most remarkable thing about being a woman is?
I think, for me, the most remarkable thing about being a woman is a sense of solidarity and community, almost. I feel like I've met so many different women from so many different backgrounds and cultures, and I think we can all relate to that shared identity that we have as being women. We know, what it feels like to be talked over in a meeting by a man, or we know what it feels like to have something mansplained to us, or unfortunately we know what it feels like to be harassed on the street. And I think that shared identity, when it's at its best, it creates a beautiful community.
And that was my conversation with Lottie. If you've got any questions or any interest in fundraising to her organisation or anything along those lines, have a look at the bio below. All of the links will be there. Tune in next week to hear another story of a remarkable woman of Nottingham.